So it's a real pleasure to be back here again. Every time I come back, I feel that it's partially coming home. And it was like coming home just now, because I went downstairs for a coffee to your very nice little pop-up coffee shop, and outside there were lots of people pushing a tyre uphill. And that felt like being at work at home, I have to say. I understand it's the World Spine Day, and one of your academics from the chiropractic division was out there. And I said to him, what does pushing a tyre uphill help? How does that help your spine? And he said to me, it doesn't, but it gets us lots of patients. So as usual, amazingly entrepreneurial you are. So let's get on with the talk. So I want to talk a little bit about professional integrity, and I'm going to involve you, of course, in this. So I'm going to ask you some questions, and I won't stand for, oh, I don't know, or oh, I can't. I need to have definitive answers from you. So let's start anyway. And I think it's always worth defining what you're talking about so we're all on the same page. And so I took this definition from Merriam-Webster dictionary about integrity. And so integrity, what I'm going to talk about, is about adherence to moral... I'm going to take this off here, I think, because otherwise if I turn away you won't be able to hear me. Adherence to moral and ethical principles, soundness of moral character and honesty. And before you go to sleep, I hope it's not going to be quite as dry as it sounds, really. So are these concerns new? Are concerns about morals and moral character new? Well, I don't think so. And some of you will have seen, I apologize, some of you will see the next couple of slides before, but I hope that they're still instructive. So let's look at a bit of history, because history is really important. And, those that don't learn from history are condemned to repeat it, aren't they? So this man is a very famous physician. It's James Paget, and he's had several, of course, conditions and diseases named after him. But many of you may not know that he was the first medical educationalist, in actual fact. And actually, he was the first person to look at learner analytics. Now, learner analytics is uber trendy at the moment, isn't it? Every time you put on something, or say from McKinsey or from something else, it's all about learner analytics. Well, actually, Paget wrote the first paper involving learning analytics over 2 centuries ago. So he wrote this paper, What Becomes of Medical Students? And these were medical students who studied at Bart's medical school. And he published this paper in 1869, so some considerable time ago. Let's just look at what he found. This is a picture of Bart's Hospital. Doesn't look that much different now, I don't think. We're fond of tradition in the UK. So these are his results. So you can see that most of the people did reasonably okay. It's a sign of the times, really. Our students think it's bad, it's hard work these days, but actually most people don't die in the course of doing their studies anymore. So that perhaps doesn't surprise you. And of course, actually, these people are not really interesting, are they? These ones are the much more interesting ones, really. And so he went on to look at those in more detail. And this is what he found. Actually, there was nothing really that bound them together. They were all failures in their own way. But 15 couldn't pass due to idleness or listlessness or just plain stupidity. But I love the word listlessness. That's great, isn't it? And next time I see a student in Leeds, I shall say, you are listless. I think it's going to be a great diagnosis for me. 6 failed because of scandalous misconduct. How interesting, how intriguing is that? 10 because they were drunkards, actually. And then because they didn't have the assessment system that you have here in IMU, 10 just through bad luck, really. So let's look at that in even more detail. What about those who left the profession, the ones who were involved in scandalous misconduct? What happened to them? Well, 13 were expelled in disgrace. 3 were wisely removed by friends. It's always good to have friends, really, who can get you out of harm's way. 3 became actors. In the UK, there's not much difference between being a doctor and an actor. 3 became homeopaths, but they weren't any good at that either. And remember that this is Bart's in London, and so 2 retired. They were too rich to need to work, so they didn't bother to do anything else. So I think that tells us is that it's not a new thing, that there have been people who've behaved badly, really for many, many years. And I want to now talk a little bit about honesty. And this, of course, as many of you will know, this is Pinocchio, who, when he actually told lies, his nose got bigger. And this is Jiminy Cricket who's lecturing him about that. And about honesty. So, first of all, is honesty important in life? Is it, should you, are people who are honest, do they get on or not? Is it really important? Surely we all tell lies, don't we? When my husband says, did you like that meal I cooked you? What am I going to say? I say, darling, that was fabulous. I don't think we should have it again too often, though. It might, I don't want to get, overcome. And so is honesty important in life? And then perhaps more important for us is honesty more important in medical students than other students? And although I'm going to talk about medical students, we could talk about the same about pharmacy students or nursing students or other kinds of healthcare students. So this is not relating to them, but where my work has been, it's been much more in medical students. And so I'm going to ask you those questions at the end. So should we hold medical students and other healthcare students to higher standards than the general population? Let's just talk about the population and what happens around us. There is increasing concern about dishonesty in life. This is a bar chart from the Journal of Medical Ethics. And what it shows you is the number of publications that have been withdrawn through fraud. You can see in 2000, very few. But as we get more and more up into the noughties, then actually more and more are withdrawn through fabrication. And you see that even in the best journals. So here in Nature, there have been reports of a peer review scam where people have been nominating their friends as peer reviewers or even themselves under assumed names. And perhaps even more recently, they found that there was 120 papers that had to be withdrawn because the results were just gibberish and no one spotted that. So within academic life then, there is increasing dishonesty. Okay? We can debate what the causes of that are, the imperative to publish, the KPIs that say if you're not publishing in high impact journals, then you will lose your job or not be thought of as pulling your weight, perhaps. But let's look about other areas of life. I love this quote here: never underestimate the dishonesty of politicians. And that was a piece in the Huffington Post in April this year. This is about, of course, this is from The Guardian, about the LIBOR scandal in banking. And this, of course, is perhaps at least one false claim a day by Donald Trump. So this is the facts and alternative facts and the lying media story. So dishonesty is everywhere in the media. We're at a more dishonest time in our civilization than perhaps at any time in the past. I mean, you might think that something as wholesome as sport is immune from this, but not so. There have been huge scandals in cycling, for example, and then more recently looking at the Russian team at the Olympics, and they were barred, if you remember, from the last Olympics. So there's huge issues. So all around our students, there is this bit about you have to cheat to get on. So why should they be more immune than other people? Now, this is why it's important, I think, is that the best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour. And although it's not an absolute truth within itself, it generally is true that those people who have been dishonest in their undergraduate life will go on to be dishonest in their postgraduate life. And that's borne out by the fact that when people are caught out for dishonesty in maybe their PhD or in their publications later on, when people have gone back to look at their student projects, they've seen the same the same behaviours. And so it thought that if you got away with it once, then you're more likely to do it again. And I think that this is one of the crux of the issues that we should be thinking about and dealing with. Now, I'm going to tell you a story from Leeds, because you might think, oh, well, you know, dishonesty doesn't happen here, does it? And so in Leeds, in my own medical school, let me tell you a story about two students. In Leeds, we have what's called an elective period, which occurs at the beginning of the final year. It's a period of 8 weeks that students usually enjoy, and they will take the opportunity, many of them, to go to different parts of the world to look at how medicine is practiced there, or to take part in research in different parts of the world. We get the students to arrange their own electives because it's part of them taking responsibility for their own future careers. So they're asked to arrange these electives themselves. We can give them contacts or we can give them some support, but they are meant to do this themselves. Two students arranged to go to a part of the world and to a hospital that was amazingly popular. They were accepted, but they had a letter to say, we only accept students for 4 weeks because we are so popular, we want to ensure that as many students as possible get the opportunity to come here. Not a big deal, you would think. But because the students have to arrange the whole 8 weeks for themselves, these students decided to change the dates on the letter of acceptance so that it looked to the university that they got 8 weeks instead of the 4 weeks. They didn't just change a 3 to an 8. They didn't just do it on the spur of the moment. They took a whole day. They photoshopped in the official letter that they got, using a program to enhance the watermark and all those things, to actually change the dates, and they handed this in. It was only spotted some months later because of a serendipitous occurrence. So they didn't admit to what had happened. It was just found out by accident. So these students have forged an official document. Okay? They are in year 5. They are about to graduate in 3 months' time and could look after your nearest and dearest. You are asked to see them as the chair of the Fitness to Practice Committee. Now, are you going to throw them out? Are you going to smack them on the hands and let them continue? What are you going to do? Okay, who's going to throw them out? It's such a hard lot. Look at this lot here, so hard. So these kids have spent 5 years in medical school. They've done nothing wrong. And then for one mistake, you're throwing them out. You're such a hard woman. No forgiveness at all there. Who's going to let them continue just by telling them off? So you've got a forger, and you are going to let this forger work in your hospital and forge prescriptions because present behavior predicts future actions. What about the family that come to you and say, my father was harmed by the student that you let through? Okay, we'll come back to that. And I'll tell you what we did eventually. And I'll ask you again what you would do. And I'm not going to pretend I know the answer, but I can tell you what we did. Okay, so let's then move on. And what I'm going to do is tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm then going to tell it you, and then I'm going to do an MCQ. No, we won't do the MCQ. So we'll see how we go on. So I'm going to talk about what is cheating, first of all. How frequent is it? Who actually cheats? Do we think it's important? What motivates? Why do students cheat when the stakes are so high? And is this bad apples or bad barrels? So bad students or bad environments? We just got rid of a few students, it would be fine, wouldn't it? we don't have to worry about ourselves because we're all perfect, aren't we? And then what's to be done? You know, in the UK, everything goes wrong. The government's reaction is, let's blame somebody and then we can then move on. So, you know, should we just blame people? And then I want to talk about reframing cheating perhaps a bit differently than before. So let's just think about what is cheating. Now, these pictures are really quite interesting, and I put them together purposefully. Some of you will know that the oldest national assessments were for the Chinese civil service in the Ming period, and they had national assessments. And this is a piece of Chinese underwear, allegedly, with the answers to the questions for the exam to become a civil servant in China. So perhaps cheating has been around for a long time. I actually, of course, don't know what it says, and I would have thought it's difficult to get your underwear out when you're in an exam, but what do I know? So what's the definition of cheating? Well, this is the definition I'm going to ask you to adopt. It's breaking the rules to get ahead. So you're breaking the rules for your own advancement. Okay. So this is obviously a more up-to-date cheating method. It's not quite so fancy as the underwear, but eminently more viewable. So how common is it? Pretty uncommon, isn't it? We're all pretty good people. We're all pretty honest. Well, perhaps not as easy to measure as you think, because, of course, if you go to a set of students and say, tell me, do you cheat? Most people don't put their hand up, surprisingly. So it is quite difficult to measure. But there have been quite a lot of studies, and a lot of the studies are from the USA. But a lot of them are self-reports. So how honest are people going to be from students themselves and faculty? These are done, of course, anonymously. They actually aggregate participants from more than one institution. The sample sizes are very different, as are the response rates. And, of course, different types of cheating behaviour are actually in people's minds. It's interesting that a student of mine has just done a study looking at cheating and was asking whether taking stimulant drugs, which will enhance your memory, whether that was cheating. And a lot of people said, that was wrong, that was very wrong. But, of course, caffeine does that. And we don't ban Starbucks in the immediate time before exams, do we? So it can be quite difficult. I think we'd all know cheating in that picture that showed one person looking over somebody's shoulder in an exam. We'd all think that was so. But if you're asked to do, say, a report on some neurological issue, and you've got an uncle who's a neurologist, and you ask them and you bring them into it, is that using resources well, or is that cheating? So you can see, actually, it can be quite contentious. But let's look at some of the studies. Now, this is the actual grounds where people took those Chinese entrance exams to the civil service. And this tells you why people could use their underwear to cheat. Each one of these is a little cell. And the exams lasted 5 days. And all you were allowed to take into your cell was some bedding, your clothes, and some food. And then you stayed in that cell for 5 days, did the exams, and left. If you were unfortunate enough to die within that 5 days, I understand your body was just thrown over the wall. And so the Oskies are quite tame these days, aren't they, compared to that, really. So let's look at prevalence. An early study in the 60s of 5,000 students using 99 campuses, and this was in the States. 63% of those students reported cheating. You might think that was a lot. But Donald McCabe and Linda Trevino, who's done a huge amount of work in this area, in a more recent study, showed that 70% of students reported some form of cheating. And in another study in 2005, of a huge number of students from 83 campuses, 25 to 50% admit of some form of cheating or other. And in the interestingly named Centre for Academic Integrity, 70% of college students admitted some form of cheating. So I would say to you that this is not a small issue. Of course, this graph will interest Tan Sri and myself, because this is when we were students and it was the good old days and morals were high, and now we've all gone to hell in a handcart. It's all fallen apart. But actually, this really epitomizes it. A study in 1972, 93% of US college students felt that cheating was just a way of life. And if I don't cheat, everybody else cheats, so I'm going to be disadvantaged. So I have to cheat, and I'm a victim, really. So who cheats? Well, of course, it's those people who can't keep up, the ones who you can spot. You know, they look like cheats, don't they? I don't know if you over here, but when if we have somebody who's a murderer at home or somebody who's done some dreadful things, they put the police picture up of them on the screen. And of course, they're taking at a time when they've been interrogated for about 25 hours and no sleep. And so they look, don't they? I mean, you think, I picked them out. They look like a murderer. They look like a serial killer. So who cheats? We should be able to say, you're a cheat. You just look that way. I'm sorry, you're in my line of sight here. We're friends. He knows me. So who is it that cheats then? Well, actually, there's a quote here from the States. It's not the dumb kids who cheat. It's the kids with the 4.6 grade point average who are under so much pressure to keep up their grades and to get into the best colleges. They're the ones who are smart enough to figure out how to cheat without getting caught. And actually, I saw this paper on my way over. Some people know I had a little bit more time than I intended on my way over. So praising young children for being smart promotes cheating. So you can't do right if you're a parent. If it's not one thing, it's your mother. That's what they say. So stop telling the kids they're doing well. I think that was the message from that paper. So who cheats? This young lady, of course, very inventive with her cheating here. Difficult for men. It's a bit genderless, this picture, of course. And you can't wear very high denier stockings, otherwise you can't read anything through your tights. So who is it that cheats then? Gender changes. Well, in the early studies, it was found to be more men than women who cheated. And that was put down to perhaps men being engaged in more risky behaviour and so forth. It's a male thing, just give it a shot, you know, I'll never be found out. But actually, it seems to have changed quite a lot now. And whether it is that the girls have become more aligned to men in their behaviours, I don't know. But really, back in 1993, it was found that it had equalised. So men and girls were involved in this to an equal degree. Many of the studies have shown, again, it's from the States, so it may be different, that actually more people are prone to cheat in high school than they are when they get to university or into further and higher education. And the thought behind that was people will cheat to get into a university, but then because the stakes are so high, if they get caught to be thrown out, then that they don't cheat anymore. I'm not quite so sure myself. It may be that we're not as good at detecting it, of course. Humanities are thought to be easier to cheat in than science, but what do you think the discipline with the highest rate of cheating is? What do you think it might be? Any ideas? Come on, what do you think it might be? Sorry? Law? Medicine? Anything else? Somebody else once shouted out to me theology, which I thought was a bit unkind. But I don't know. What do you think? Come on, you should know. What is it the most likely to be the biggest cheats? What do you think? Sorry? Politics. Yeah, good point. You probably have to cheat to get in. If you don't cheat well enough, they don't let you in, actually. Politics. Well, business studies, actually, was the thing that came out highest. And there are some cultural effects about cheating and so forth, particularly around things like plagiarism and cultural background about what could be considered plagiarism and what actually is accepted and not accepted. So, but it's not only students who cheat. You might think it's just the students who cheat. Teachers as well. These are teachers from state schools in the south of the US, in Alabama, and Georgia. Atlanta and Georgia. And these were actually put in prison for cheating on behalf of their students. But these teachers, of course, are under huge pressure to produce amazing results with little resources and children who come from high deprivation areas. So I'm not defending it, but perhaps I'm trying to understand it. However, even in privileged schools, this happened over the summer in the UK. So Winchester and Eton, of course, which are paradoxically in the UK known as public schools, and not private schools, but they're private nevertheless, have actually had people who have left because of cheating scandals, helping students get better marks. The cost of going to Eton is 39,000 GBP per year, so maybe you're buying a better education, but just better marks. That might be the case. And even parents. This is from Billa in India, and these are parents who are outside the exam hall and are throwing in pieces of paper with the answers on to their children. They must be amazingly accurate, I thought, with their throwing. And how do they know what the questions are? I really don't know, but it's quite amazing, really. So, but let's talk about medicine. Medicine's different, isn't it? This is a picture of my husband. No, I joke. It's what he would like to think he is, but it's not. So nobody cheats in medicine, do they? We're such nice people, aren't we? You think? Really? Well, let's look at healthcare students, first of all. So these are nurses. Let's look at nursing. And let's look at the studies that have been done on nursing. So in 2008, McCabe, again from the States, found that 58% of undergraduates and 47% of graduate nurses admitted to cheating. And Arhan and Jones in 2009, 30% of nurses thought that making up laboratory results was not dishonest. This has real implications now. Lying about the Krebs cycle is one thing. Saying that somebody's glucose level is normal is something else entirely. And if you think that that doesn't happen, this is from the BBC. Nurses jailed over fake results. 2 nurses who failed to carry out blood glucose tests on patients and then fake the results have been jailed. It's not unknown. I'm not saying it's hugely prevalent, but it's not unknown. And it has huge implications for patient care. But let's look at pharmacy. Pharmacists, they're great. They're clean, they're hygienic, they look great in all that white gear. They must be honest, mustn't they? Fabulous. Well, not quite as many admitted cheating in the course. And remember, these people have got control of your drugs, but that 34% admitted cheating in a different study, in a more recent study, and 91% admitted some form of copying from another student. Now, medical schools, student doctors, the guardians of our health, the people who are going to replace us in the future, honest as the day is long. Well, not quite, actually. Searles, 1980, 58% of medical students reported cheating at least once. Baldwin in 1996, 5% cheating in medical school, but 80% had cheated to get into medical school. Remember, we talked about more people cheating in high school to get into university. And Joy Cosby and Denise Rennie in 2001 in Dundee, 2% admitted to copying, 58% admitted to plagiarism. And this is admitted, so this is not by accident. This is by design. And then Derby in 2010, 1.5% of students admitted to cheating exams, but 43% falsifying clinical findings. So in the notes where it says abdominal examination NAD, no abnormality detected, might actually stand for not actually done. And of course, actually, clinical findings can be very, very important for patient care, as you'll be aware. So why is it important? Is it that cheating in exams and failing to report errors? So if you cheat on an exam, how much are you likely to own up to say, I made a mistake in that patient's care, I wrote up the wrong drug, I did something wrong? Or is it the fact that you're going to cover that up as well? And this is what a patient said to me when we were doing some interviews with patients about what they thought about cheating and medical students. No one wants to be looked after by a cheating doctor. And of course, are tutors at medical school more likely to fabricate clinical data? And actually, are they competent to be medical practitioners? because of course we don't know that if they've cheated through their exams. And remember, we talked about at the beginning whether past behaviour predicts future actions. So is it bad apples or bad barrels? If it's individuals, we just cut them out like this apple here, we get rid of them, and we've solved the problem. So all we need to do is hang one or two cheating students and nobody else will do it again. Bring back capital punishment for cheating in medical school. Could be a good mantra. Don't think it's going to get you many students coming to your school, but it's an interesting thing. Or what about the culture that surrounds medical students, the culture that they're in? So is it the students or is it the situation that they find themselves in? We know that doing medicine it's a hard and it's an exacting course. So let's just look a little bit about why students cheat. I don't know about you, but I couldn't actually read these if it was me to be cheating in maths, actually. So the type of assessment we know can determine what kind of teaching. People are less likely to cheat in MCQs, but there are special software called things like Axononics that can look at how likely it is that you and the next person next to you got the same answers in the same order. You can do it. So we can do quite sophisticated things now if we wish to. It's said that actually students cheat only if there's a low level of detection. So if people think they're going to be detected, they will cheat less. And there is this huge pressure to perform. Remember, we talked about that actually before students got into medical school. But at medical school, there is this huge pressure to perform. And I'll talk about this from a UK perspective in a moment. What about burnout? Burnout now seems to have hit epidemic proportions. Every time I look at a newspaper or at a journal, let's talk about physician burnout. And it's prevalent in students, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And then there's a perception of wrongdoing or the culture in which people find themselves. So let's look at the pressure to perform. This is a very interesting picture. For those of you at the front can probably see better. This man has a false arm here, and his real hand is under here with his phone. So the lesson from this is, if you see a student in an exam with 3 arms, they're probably cheating, I would think. How inventive is that? That is so cool. He should be in engineering or something, shouldn't he? So there is this huge pressure to get into medical school courses. It's not good enough to, now in the UK and in the States, to get into a university. You've got to get into the right university. And it's not good enough to get into a good university for this course. It's got to be the right course. So constantly our students and our children are under a huge pressure. If I look at the qualities that get students into medical school now, I certainly wouldn't get into medical school. Many people might say that's a good thing. But so they come along, they are personable, they're enthusiastic, they're incredibly academically bright, they are playing clarinet to grade 99, they're doing interplanetary Duke of Edinburgh's award. They're dragging old ladies across the road on a weekly basis, and on a Friday night they're doing world peace. They are deeply scary people who have no time just to go out and enjoy themselves, as far as I can see. And I was at a medical school open day recently where a young man asked me, I'm doing 8 A-levels. 8 A-levels. What do you think I should do? And I said, well, I think you should get out more, really. It's just ridiculous. We only asked for 3. People have gone mad. There's other things to do than just study academically. But I don't suppose he took any notice at all. But there is huge pressure to get into medical school. And once you're in there, it used to be all right. We used to say to students, you're here now, relax, enjoy yourselves, experiment with ways of doing things. And then what happened in the mid-2000s was we brought in a ranking in courses. Before that, we'd stopped ranking students because, of course, I used to go into the first years and say, welcome to Leeds, we're really pleased you're here. What you need to understand is, in this class, 50% of you will be below average. And, of course, there was emotional meltdown. Statistically inevitable, but emotionally devastating. And then Richard Fuller stopped me from going and saying that. He thought it was demotivating, he said. I thought it was just tough. It was just tough love. But so it's not about comparing yourself to somebody else, because when you're competent, you will graduate. If you're not yet competent, we need to keep you till you're competent. And that's what we said. And the whole medical school had a different feel about it. Then in the mid-2000s, we had to rank people. Initially, we had to rank people into quartiles. And then to make it more accurate, we had to rank them into deciles, as if that makes any difference. And now, of course, the whole country at graduation are ranked. All the students are ranked. And that enables them to get the jobs that they want. And you might think that that's really not a bad way to do it. We graduate about 7,300 students a year. If you rank students, somebody must be ranked 7,300th. It doesn't mean to say that they're not competent. Because they've graduated, they will be competent to work. But how would you like to know that you're number 7,300th in the country? I don't suppose that's going to do much for your self-esteem. But somebody has to be like that. And it's interesting. I went to another medical school in the UK who said, our dean is really pressurising us. He says that nobody in our school should be in our bottom decile. And of course, if you're ranking people in your school to deciles, that's inevitable. So he said, but what can we do? So I said, well, the only thing I can suggest is to have 11 deciles, and then nobody will be in the bottom decile. That's the only thing I can do. Just gone mad. And so now, as I said, there is national ranking for foundation posts. It is pernicious and makes people behave in a pernicious way. I don't want to be in your group because you're dyslexic and you're going to pull down my marks. But we're the caring profession. How wrong is that? Student burnout. Medicine is an intrinsically demanding profession. We know that, as is the other healthcare professions, of course. Actually, burnout is quite common amongst medical students, which is something I didn't realise until I looked into it. And in some studies, the estimate is up to 50% of medical students may be affected by burnout. Now, the thing about burnout, of course, is it's a huge spectrum. So I'm not saying that all of them will be very deeply affected. But it's a tragic, that is a tragic statistic, I think, on the pressure we put people under who are amazingly talented, who are tomorrow's leaders in healthcare. And this is the pressure we put them under. This is wrong. This is so wrong. And the culture, of course, so in different cultures, people feel they have the right to cheat. And of course, this is what the Americans like. It's only foreigners who cheat, it's not us. But of course, they're quite wrong. It's indigenous Americans as much as anybody else, of course. So what's to be done? What can we do about this? Well, we can have prevention, very simple things. So remember we talked about being more vigilant to it. And this is a very interesting picture from Thailand. This is a very cheap solution where people make their own little hats here with the pieces of paper which stop them. A bit like blinkers and horses, really, isn't it? You can't make this up, really. Increased detection, so more people walking around the halls. We've got now Turnitin, which is an electronic mechanism for looking at plagiarism and so forth. We can punish them, as I say. If you're caught in cheating in Leeds, you know, there are, at exam time, there are notices all the way about being thrown out of the university in disgrace, of course. But what about student support? What about actually supporting students and trying to understand why they feel the need to cheat? And looking at our own culture. Is it our culture that actually says that cheating is okay? And in the work from the States, again, honour codes, learning contracts, and ethics and moral philosophy teaching early on. To say, actually, it's not just to stop you, but we need to know, and you need to know, that you're competent to work as a healthcare professional when you graduate. So it's not about punishing you or stopping you, it's making sure that on that first night, when you're on call in a hospital with little help and support, that you can do it because you passed all your assessments and have proved to yourself, your peers, your employers, your patients, your teachers, that you can cope with this. So it's getting people to understand why we assess and why we're trying to assess an individual as opposed to their friends. The GMC gives us some guidance, and this is a copy of a table from the GMC document relating to that. And as you can see, it talks here about dishonesty and so forth. And what it says is that the medical school should take action if the student's behaviour is such that the trust in the medical profession might be undermined. And this is the key, isn't it? It's trust. And that comes back to what that patient said all those slides ago. I wouldn't want to be treated by a cheating doctor. It's about trust. And that's why I think that this is something which is really, really important to us as healthcare educators. So the culture, I would define the culture as the way we do things here. These are our values. And I know that you've defined your values because you have your vision and your mission statement and then your IMU values. And I think that that's, to be actually articulating those is really, really important. And it's about attitudes and behaviours. And I want to show you a diagram of planned behaviour because I think that this is really pertinent. So some years ago, Bikram Jha, who was a senior lecturer and did a PhD with me and then went on to become Professor of Medical Education at Liverpool and is now working for the Apollo Group in India, did his PhD on student cheating. And he looked at the theory of planned behaviour by Ajahn, which was first described in 1991. And some of you may know this because it's used a lot in public health to get people to change their behaviours to cut down their smoking or stop smoking or cut down their eating or alcohol intake. What he showed was actually behaviour and intention were linked, where attitudes were linked. And there were three things that influence your behaviour. The first was your attitude to performing that behaviour. The second was a subjective norm to performing that behaviour. The third about your belief about your ability to perform that behaviour. And that these things worked interactively to feed into behavioural intent, and behavioural intent was more directly related to behaviour. We use this now, this framework, in the Fitness to Practice and Health and Conduct Committee that I chair in Leeds. And obviously, I'm just one of quite a number of people who are on that. So, let's come back to the story of those students. You remember the ones who forged the document. What they said, we brought them in, and what they said was this. We couldn't get 8 weeks. We could only get 4 weeks, so we had to forge this thing. We were victims. We couldn't help it. Nobody takes the elective seriously here. It's just a bit of fun. People go to Australia, they surf, they do a bit of work, but nobody really takes it serious. This has got nothing to do with looking after patients. It's not like forging a prescription. We wouldn't do that. It's just to do with an elective period in the medical school. So we wouldn't forge anything to do with patients. That's what they said. Okay? So it's now 2 months till they graduate. And you're the chair of the committee. And you've got the casting vote. So are you going to let them continue? Or are you going to let them carry on? So who's going to let them continue? So Aziz, he's such a nice man. Who else? Come on, May, what are you going to do? You're going to let them continue? Yeah. Yeah, with counselling. Don't do it again. One mistake. So one stab through the heart. Just a mistake. You know, my husband walked into the knife I was holding. He walked into the knife 10 times. Just one mistake. Who's going to throw them out? Oh, tough, tough, tough. Here. One mistake. One mistake. Have you ever parked in the wrong place? One mistake. Have you ever got a speeding ticket? One mistake. Yeah.
Does it have to be either continue or thrown out?
You see, weak. That's just a weak one there, you know. Well, we rang up the GMC to get help and advice, of course. Bring, 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 bring. Your call is important to us. Stay on the line. It's a premium rate. Bring, bring. Hello, it's Professor Roberts here from Leeds. We have this problem. What should we do? Oh, that's a very interesting problem. We think the medical schools should solve it. Thank you very much. Okay, so, Victor.
I think there's a range of punishment.
Right, go on then.
Throwing them out is too harsh.
Too harsh, yeah.
But letting them continue without any punishment is wrong.
So not counselling then, punishment.
I'll probably suspend them.
Right,
Maybe for a year.
right. So but you might pull out toenails or something like that. No. Where are the students? Right, what would you do? Okay, so you're on the committee. It's now 2 weeks before graduation. Well, let me tell you what we did. We took Victor's approach. But we went back through every piece of work they'd ever done beforehand to look for some other elements of cheating. We went back through everything, put it through Turn It In. We went back to all their supervisors on their placements and who'd ever been involved with them. Now, it's a bit difficult. You can't really hold the picture up and say, is that a cheat? Do you recognise this person as a serial cheater? So we had to just say, do you remember this student? They were with you at this time. Did you have any cause for concern about their behaviour? There was nothing. Nothing. We turned up nothing at all. So what we did was, we suspended them for the year, because what we said was, we can't be certain that you won't do this again when you're under stress and pressure. Okay? But let's just go back to this, and let's look at how we use this. So we suspended them for a year, which has huge implications in the UK, because they will have to pay fees again for another year. That's another £9,000. They will have to support themselves for another year. And they will lose a year of earnings. So it has huge implications. So we don't do this lightly. We got them to write a 3,000-word essay to actually talk about why trust in all things was important, why honesty in all things was important, because it's about trust. It's about trust that the patient's having you as a doctor or you as a healthcare professional. So we got them to do that. We looked at the subjective norm is the prevailing culture. So was there a prevailing culture that the elective wasn't important? What were we saying about that? Now, the thing is, we didn't want to make it so harsh and have lots and lots of assessments. We wanted students to go away and enjoy themselves about learning about other healthcare systems. You know, not to say come back and you'll do 300 questions, MCQ or write, whatever. But what we do is through the Health and Conduct Committee, we, at the end of the year, the cases that we see and the judgments that we decide on are published anonymously. So sometimes they're conflated so that that students aren't identified, because there's no point in identifying students twice to say that this is why we thought it was important. And of course, actually, when students disappear from a year and then reappear another year, you can imagine that things get talked about. And what we were saying was that actually, this is an important part of the course, and honesty about this is important. And then the third thing was, we took seriously the fact that they apparently thought they couldn't find another 4 weeks. Of course they could have done. And what we have now in place is if you can't find 8 weeks, if for whatever reason it all goes wrong, we've got an administrator who will help you find another 4 weeks, possibly in Leeds at home or somewhere in the UK to do that. So what this did for me, it helped me to actually break down the actions, try and understand why they'd done what they'd done, and address those things. And we were not blameless. The culture that was in the medical school was not blameless, and we had to acknowledge that and actually take our own responsibility for that. So this is really, really important, the culture and what you say about yourselves and how you act. Because like it or not, we are all role models. It's a bit of a shock, really, to wake up one day and realise you're a role model. I thought I was past my sell-by date, but it's, you know, we all are, whether we like it or not. So the other thing that we do in Leeds now is we have a professionalism ceremony. When students come in year one, I love it. They've just arrived, and last week I was talking to them, and they're full of enthusiasm. They're fantastically energising to talk to. They're going to cure cancer by Christmas. They're going to sort out the NHS. And I and people like me need to stand aside because we've had our chance and we have failed. It's extremely energising. I find futile optimism in the face of overwhelming odds really energising. It's great. And then again, when we are all together for graduation, when they're graduating, and their parents are there, it's an extremely happy occasion. And that's the last time we're together as a family, if you like, for them. And we wanted to have something that captured that spirit halfway through. So now in year 3, we have the professionalism ceremony, which is a bit like the white coat ceremony, if you like, for the States. But of course, in the UK, we don't have white coats anymore. And so we all get together, we all dress up in fancy dress, and we have 2 inspiring speakers, usually nationally recognised, to talk about what it means to be a doctor and the responsibilities and the rewards that you have. So last year we had a lady surgeon who'd worked in Srebrenica during the fighting and so forth. She's a paediatric surgeon, and hugely inspiring stories that she told about the rewards of doing that really very difficult and challenging job. So it's about that, again, feel-good factor. And it's not only for students, but it's a faculty as well, because when you're really, really busy and you've got a load of marking or endless committees, it sometimes means that you lose sight of what we're actually all here and doing. It is all about patients. It's all about making a difference in patients' lives and caring for them, of course, however we do it, either personally or through training others. And so it's a really energizing time for all of us just to take that moment and to reaffirm what we're trying to do. So is cheating a worse crime for medical students than it is for other students? I would say yes. And the reason I say yes is because it erodes the thing which is most dear to us as not only doctors but all healthcare professionals. It's about trust. And once we lose this, once we lose trust from our patients, from society, I would say that sadly we've lost everything. So Bart Simpson is right, cheating is wrong. Thank you very much. And it does sunshine in the UK on occasion.
No, I heard you mention earlier about values. I think this is a very important issue, that an institution or a family or an individual must have values, because the values actually determine your behavior. So if you are guided by your values, then no matter what challenge comes against you, if you practice the values that you treasure, I think you lead you into the right direction of behavior. What's your comment on that?
I mean, I think you're right, but I think we need to revisit our values, because some values are changed. So there are some values which are unchanging, I would say, but there are some values that do change. So the values like patriarchy or doctor knows best or patients don't question the doctor and so forth. So those things have now changed or should be changing. Whereas other things, such as honesty, integrity, are, timeless, if you like. So I think it's very useful every now and again to just examine your values. Are they still current? And to actually do that with the students. Because if we all sign up to that, then we're all held accountable to that. So I think it's right, but we need to refresh them. Otherwise, it's a bit like a mission statement. I'm sure it doesn't happen here, but people write them. People think, oh, great, that we've written it, and it goes into a filing cabinet or into the electronic web, and you never look at it again until somebody says, don't we have a mission statement somewhere? And it needs to be a living document, I would say. And so that was what if you like, you remember I talked about moral reasoning and moral philosophy. So actually having that early in the course, talking about the humanities side of things, what it means to be a doctor, what are the responsibilities on you to be a doctor, and so forth. And there are some debates which I think are really quite difficult. I don't know what they are. Are you always a doctor? Can you never be just a normal person, as it were? Have you always got to live up to that high level of things? And I don't know. I mean, I think people these days are slightly different. People would say, what I do in my own time is up to me. I'm not, I'm only a doctor or a nurse when I'm actually at work. I don't know, and they're quite difficult things, I think, really. Quite difficult.
All right, Trudie, thanks for the information, and it's really interesting. I'd just like to ask, besides asking the students writing a 10,000 essay on how important
3,000.
or 3,000 on how important it is about honesty, what other options or what other things that we can do to change the students?
Well, for a long time we've relied on them writing an essay or a piece to get them to think it through. And they're not just sent off to write that. They have someone who will help them and support them and so forth. And it's actually assessed. It's not just, any old 3,000 words. But more recently what we've done is we have nearly 200 patients and carers who work alongside us in educating our students. And so we've involved those students. Those individuals in helping us. So we had students, for example, who have, it's different than it is here in Malaysia, obviously, but have taken soft drugs and been found smoking cannabis, which is not, it is illegal in the UK, but the question is whether you would throw somebody out from medical school for that. And what we've done is got them to talk to patients and carers who have either been hurt themselves or whose relatives have been hurt by a doctor who's been addicted, and showing them the human face of what happens when you behave in a certain way. And that, of course, is much more powerful than doing a 3,000-word essay or talking to someone like me, to actually see the consequences, what happens. And this family said to the student, we don't trust doctors anymore. So if we have symptoms now, we put off going to the doctor. We look at the internet because we just don't trust them anymore. And that's very powerful, I think. So you're right, there are other things that you can do. And I would say bringing in patients who are there to help, but to point out what happens as a consequence of your actions, I think is very powerful.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
First of all, I have to say it's been a pleasure listening to you. My question is about what should be the role of parents or the institute, like in terms of supporting the students, like creating supportive environments or parents not putting too much pressure on the children. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, as I've mentioned, I'm a parent of 2 girls, and I think the area of the perfect parent is barren, really. I think it's very difficult to be a parent. You want the kids to do as well as they can, because in my case there aren't any money, lands or title, it's just education that can get people to have a good standard of living, so you want to push them as far as you can. On the other hand, you see the awfulness when parents push too much and live their life vicariously through their children. And getting that balance is very difficult. I would say I don't have boys, I only have girls, but I would say it's more difficult with boys, I don't know, because I think boys, you can tell me, mature later, and therefore often they don't actually understand the seriousness and the consequence of working hard to get into a university, so that they may reap the rewards of not getting the grades that they need and so forth. Girls, on the other hand, tend to do the opposite, and actually you need to calm the girls down and to get them to go out more and be less perfectionist. Those are sweeping statements, but in general those things. But it's very difficult, and of course you're too young to have adolescent children yourself, but adolescent children they're taken over by aliens. You've got a sort of 13-year-old, you leave them in the morning, they're wonderful, charming, delightful, obedient children. You go back home at night, they're like some form of zombie. It's just they're slamming doors, they're shouting, they're crying, you're all that's bad. It is very difficult. So it's trying to be there to support them, you know, look at their potential and to get them to see that. I don't, well, you'd have to ask my children, but I'm sure they'd say I was a dreadful parent. So. But they didn't do medicine anyway, that's for sure.
I'm from Master University. I'm a fourth-year medical student.
Right, okay. Yeah. And what were your parents like then? Come
yeah,
on.
I mean, they're quite strict though. That's why I came up with this question.
Yeah, but you're being successful, so maybe it's worked.
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
Thank you, Trudie, for enlightening us. Difficult subject and very lively way you.
I think it's
make
sharing rather than
yeah,
like.
sharing it. I gathered from your talk, and overall we also observed that mostly the students' cheating and this behavior is mostly associated with the assessment. You are the assessment expert. We spend a lot of time on assessment, curriculum. Half the part is assessment, medical education all about assessment. Why not we get away with assessment from the curriculum, get away with most of the cheating?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting idea, and I think actually in the future, we will go more to that. If you think now, how many of you got a smartphone? How many of you got a smartphone? Everybody's, more or less everybody. There's the odd recidivist. Victor, have you got one? Just checking. Well, if you take that smartphone out of your pocket now and just hold it in your hands. Okay? You got it? Got your smartphone? What you've got in your hands is all of knowledge since civilization began, apart from May, who's left hers in her office. That you've got all the knowledge. So I think the question to you is, what knowledge do we need future doctors to carry here in skull and skin, and what knowledge should they be carrying here? If you look at the way that medical knowledge, or even medical information, and the two are different, of course, is exponentially increasing, what should you keep in your head? What should you keep in your phone or your smart device? And there's a very interesting sort of philosophical concept which a chap called Andy Clark, who is Professor of Philosophy in Glasgow now, has come up with his colleague, called the extended mind. So where does your mind finish? So let me give you an example. When I go home, if I want to look at the train times from Leeds back home, I don't carry it in my head. I get my phone out, I go onto the app and find it, because I don't need to carry it in my head. What do you need to carry in your head? So that knowledge, I have that knowledge, but I don't have it in here. You might know that there are guidelines for the treatment of asthma, but you might know the guidelines that were 5 years ago. Shouldn't you have the up-to-date ones? Why should you keep those in your head? Why shouldn't you just be knowing where they are? So one of the things that we never get students to do is to forget. We always get them to remember. We're testing them all the time about remembering. But there's a large amount of stuff we need to forget. In any lecture, and this one will be no exception, 60% of what I say will be untrue in 10 years' time. The trouble for us both is neither of us know which 60% that is. So you can see actually that knowledge is evolving the whole time. So in future, I can see that we're going to be encouraging students to take their phones into exams. So instead of that picture where somebody is being checked for their phone, actually you'll be asked to take your smart device into the exam. Because when I was a practicing doctor, when I was a junior doctor and we had white coats, I had a little book in my pocket that had all my little cribs about things, important things, little, mnemonics, drug dosages, all sorts of things. And that wasn't cheating, it was just having it with me so when I needed to use it, I could use it. Now, of course, nobody has white coats or books anymore, do we? But everybody has a smartphone, so they use that. So the clever thing going forward for assessment is, what is closed book knowledge, i.e. what do you need to keep? Because if Anam collapsed to the floor, touch wood she won't, but if she did, and I took my phone out, I don't think nobody would be really very impressed, would they really? Whereas, if you were looking up the treatment for hypertension and just checking what the dose of a drug was, that's perfectly acceptable. So there'll be closed book knowledge that we need to know, and that students will know why they need to know, and know why they need to be tested on that. And then the rest will be open book knowledge. And so cheating should actually go down, if that's the case. But I can see, if I go home and say, okay, we're getting the students to bring their phones into the exams, that the Yorkshire Evening Post will say, Professor Roberts encourages cheating in Leeds Medical School. So you can't win, really, can you? So it's a good question.
Can I ask one more?
No, there's another question here. We'll just go it around first.
Yeah. Hi, Trudie.
Hi.
I enjoyed your lecture as always. Occasionally we get phone calls from employers who call us to say your graduate has been unprofessional or came late for work, or there was one case where she said she was ill, but she wasn't really ill, and she posted on Facebook that she was somewhere else. So we wonder whether, how much is the university responsible for instilling professionalism? We try our best, but we often feel guilty as if it's our fault that the students are out there and they don't seem to behave professionally.
Sure.
What's your views on that?
We're not perfect, of course, like anyone else. And I think the other thing is that nobody's perfect. Everybody has lapses in professional behaviour. Okay? I have lapses in professional behaviour. I'm not proud of them, but I still do. Nobody is saintly like that picture, that surgeon. And so it's about what happens when people have found out. What happens to the reflective process? Do they understand why people are upset over that? So, for instance, with that student, with that graduate you're talking about, isn't it about having the conversation, when you post in sick, who do you think does your work? What's happening to your colleagues around you who are having to work extra because you have actually faked sickness? So it's not just about you, it's about actually what you're doing to everybody else, and how would you feel if people did that to you? So I think it's getting people to understand why that's non-professional. And I don't think, I think that we're all capable of lapses in professional behaviour, but it's what we do about them that really is important, as opposed to trying to cover them up. And so I think that partially when you're talking about lapses in professional behaviour, I think it's good for senior people to admit their own lapses, but what they've done about them as well. There used to be a thing in the New England Journal where quite senior people, senior clinicians and professors would talk about a case where they had made a mistake and what it had meant to them and what they'd done as a result of that afterwards. And I thought that those things were very powerful, because none of us should pretend to be perfect. We're not, I'm afraid. And I'm just the same as anyone else, probably worse.
I'd just like to add on to that point of institutional responsibility. Recently also there was this other issue with Glasgow. I think they had to, and it came out in BBC News, and the news is covering and the universities are addressing this. But one thing that we discussed in our Medical Educators Forum recently is about cheating in our context in the region. And what was surprising was some universities did not want to participate in this research or to actually examine to what extent, because they say at their institutional level this is not acceptable to actually talk about it. So I really appreciate I would see institutions that discuss and do research and be open about what actually happened. Actually, they are good role models, because they are saying that it's not really confined to University A, B, or C in the Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere. It's everywhere. And so this is one of the challenges we face, where some universities or some institutions, they do not want to address this issue or do not want to be part of the discussion group to start talking about cheating and the reasons why students cheat, because it's not our problem and so on and so forth. Yeah.
No, I think it's actually related to culture, how they view such things. But can I add something else, Trudie? I mean, it's this issue about cheating. I always think that there are gradations. I know you have cheated. The act, the principle is there. But cheating, let's say for those two girls, versus a student making up some results for a patient. They never checked it. I would have thought that was a more serious cheating case. Until today, I suffer something I did earlier on at IMU, which was, I think some of you will remember that case, a pair of identical twins. They were to go to Strathclyde. One of them desperately wanted to make sure that she would get through in order that she could be with her sister, because they were in everything together. She cheated. And you know, I think Prof Ong will remember, we expelled her. And she had only another 1 year left. And today, I don't actually know what had happened to her, but her sister went through. But you know, I think we sometimes need to reflect on this. It is a cheating incident, but I feel there are different levels of cheating.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult, and I think if I defend the GMC, that's why I think that having a set of rules that say if you cheat like this, you get this, if you cheat like that, is very difficult, because each case is very individual. And it's about looking at the rest of the circumstances and what the underlying motivation was. But that is very difficult, I think, really. And I think then it has to be a judgment of a number of people. So, for example, on our Health and Conduct or Fitness to Practice Committee, we have academics, we have the student support person, we have the employers represented there, we have lay people there, and we don't have students. We've discussed having students, but we've decided for the moment not to have students, but we have newly graduated doctors, because we all tend to be of a certain age, and of course it's a long time ago since we were students, and to remember the stresses that people were put under. So it's trying to get to those issues, I think, really underline it. We have excluded people. We have taken that decision. It's not an easy decision to take. And this committee is the only committee that I lose sleep over. I don't lose sleep over anything else. But because of the things that you say, you've got someone's future, their career within your hands, and that power doesn't sit easily with me, really. And it's trying to understand, and that's why we started to use that framework to try and unpick, to try and understand what was going on, to help us just to identify those issues and deal with those, as opposed to taking the whole thing.
Okay. We just saw an article here which you posted about the unprofessional thing about the GMC. What I want to observe here is we have in the student handbook the list of those professional misconduct and what are all those things which constitutes, and in the staff handbook. But most often the students really don't go through all those things. We commonly have some circumstances where students or staff come and say, I never knew this is a misconduct, or this is unprofessional. So what are the best practices or experience from other universities, how they would tell students that these are unprofessional?
Well, I think that's a good question, because if I knew the whole answer, I'd have a committee that didn't do anything. You know, we'd be redundant, but we're not. I think you're right. Those sorts of handbooks, I'm sure if I went to Leeds and said, who's read this handbook on professional, or unprofessional behaviour, there'd be very few people. And the ones that did say they'd read it would be lying. So it's difficult. So I think it's about discussing the difficulties and the responsibilities about being a medical student and a student doctor, because they are my colleagues, student colleagues, and doing that right up front. So we have a part of the course which starts in the first year, in the first term, which is about what does it mean to become a doctor, and people think they know. They come and they think they know, and they get their ideas from ER, from house, from casualty, and so they come thinking we're going to diagnose somebody and cure them by the first commercial break. And it doesn't work like that. So it is talking to them. And what we use some of the cases that we've seen. So for example, let me give you an example of a case. We've got a very big new sports arena now in Leeds, all very nice and so forth. And the only way we've got this on campus is because it's shared with the public, and that's perfectly fine. The public are entitled to come and they can join and use at different times of the day. a group of students were in the changing room, and they were talking. There was 3 medical students and 2 other students, and the 2 other students were asking the medical students, because they knew they were medical students, what's it like in the dissecting room? What's it like to cut up a dead body? And so, of course, there were grisly tales about what was going on and so forth. But what they failed to know was the fact that there were 2 members of the public who were also in that changing room. And the members of the public wrote to me to complain that the students were talking in a derogatory way about dissection and so forth. And so we got the students in, and these are brand new first-year students. And it's getting them to understand about confidentiality. Because if you like, their cadavers are their first patients. And to be asked, what would you do if you're in this situation? To be asked about the fact that it's confidential. Now, confidentiality is real. You can talk about it in the abstract, but this is real. And so what we got them to do was, we were sympathetic because we can see how it happens. But we got them to write a little guide for other students who might find themselves in this same situation, and to use that during the course. So it's about students themselves saying that these are the difficulties we've faced and this is what we've done about it. So I think it's about talking about these things early on, and being open about it. That, it is difficult, and it's not trying to stop you enjoying yourself, but you have chosen this course, this profession, and there are responsibilities. It's a huge privilege, of course, and there are lots of privileges accorded to you by society, by other individuals, who will confide in you the most intimate and private details of their lives, but with that come the responsibilities. And it's about knowing that right from the very beginning, I think, sadly.
Thank you, Trudie. I'm David Chong. I think I last met you in the governance study. Anyway, I'd like to offer an answer to your question. Should we expect medical students to be better behaved? I happen to teach ethics to pharmacy students, and I usually tell them that it's very difficult to know when you should have your pharmacist hat on and when you can take it off safely. And I suppose what I'm saying is that we need to be accountable. Any health professional needs to be accountable, I suppose, all the time. If you are asked, I tell the story. I say I have a lot of conversations with my lawyer friend, and sometimes he asks me, are you asking me as a friend or are you asking me as a lawyer? Yeah. And I say, well, I'm asking you as a friend because if I asked you as a lawyer, you would give me a bill tomorrow. But what he's saying, I think I'm speaking the obvious, what he's saying is that if you're asking me as a lawyer, then I put my lawyer hat on and I'm very careful what I say. So I think that's probably a useful thing to tell students.
Yeah. I think this is a really difficult. It's not an easy answer to a question, really. Are you always a doctor? Or are you always a pharmacist, or whatever? And of course, I think younger generations would say, I can be accountable when I'm at work, but when I'm not at work, what I do is my own business. But let me give you this example, and I don't know what the answer is to this. But so let's think about this. What about somebody who views pornography on the internet? Now, I'm not talking about child pornography because that's illegal, but adult pornography. More and more common these days, I understand. What people do in their own time is up to them, is it? What if that person was a gynecologist, was a male gynecologist? Would you want to see him? Bearing in mind that most pornography, but not all, but most pornography shows women in degrading positions and so forth. Would you want to see that person as your gynecologist? Would you want your mother to go and see them as a gynecologist? Would you want your sister to go and see them? Would you want your daughter to go and see them? And yet it's not illegal. And if they're not doing it on university or hospital computers, what they do in their own time is up to them, is it? So it's not easy, I don't think, these things. There's a blurring of things. And, obviously I have my personal opinions, but you can see how it can be quite blurred when people say, what I do in my own time is up to me.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Trudie. My name is Sagi. This is regarding the research conduct actually, especially related to the experimental research. Actually, we all researchers, we have been involved in actively involved in research. And we have seen, evaluated, and worked with students to do research and all. But how often we see, how often we see researchers being honest to present the results like it didn't work, my project failed. How often we can see, or what is the role of the government, or what is the role of the institution to encourage being honest? Because if everything going to work positively, why we shall do research? Research can have positive things, negative things, failure also. And that is my question one. Second question is, now the research institution, we are in the era of ranking, Cetera, world ranking, time ranking. And one of the measure is the research outputs. And government's also encouraging research output and everything. So with this pressure, KPIs are linked down to the KPIs of the individual KPIs, and we have certain number of papers. So with this pressure, stress, people are going for open access, paid journals, and the quality is in question. So what is the role actually of institution so in this situation? Thank you.
I think your questions are really important, and I understand the pressure for publication and for research. It happens in my own institute, of course. And I don't think I necessarily have the answer, but what I would give you the example of what happened in the Karolinska Institute more recently. The name of the chap, I can't remember now, I think it was Italian, but he was a surgeon. He was recruited as one of the top surgeons for tracheal implantation, artificial tracheal implantation. And he was a superstar. He was the darling of the president of the KI Institute and so forth. He had money and accolades poured over him. He was tall, very handsome, and very charismatic. And it was all false. It was all lies. And people died as a result of that, because if you transplant a artificial trachea into someone who's got inoperable cancer, that's one thing. It's a huge risk, and the patient, if they know that, may be willing to take that risk. But when these were stenoses, which were livable with, but people didn't like it, and they had artificial tracheas put in place, and they were misrepresented about how well they were doing and so forth. It's an extremely good program which you can find online about him. And of course, what happened at the KI was you can imagine everything went fantastically well, despite those people's warnings saying that this is not working, it's not possible to work. And then it all fell apart. The president and senior management of the KI all resigned, all had to go. So when it goes wrong in a huge way. And what people will say when you talk to them about their research, particularly if they're a young researcher not in a high prominent position, is, well, nobody reads my research, it's not going to make a big deal, if I publish and say it works. Well, that's not true, of course, because people do take research seriously, and further research occurs because of that, and then people's treatment can occur because of that. And as someone who has published my thesis in the section of no positive results occurred as a result of this 3 years' work, I understand it entirely, and I think that we do need to actually have a reassessment of what counts as success, I think, really. Because careful done research that shows no improvement or a negative thing is equally as valuable, of course, as showing positive work. But that's about an institution valuing the people and saying that honesty is far better than just glory, I think. It's not easy, though. And as you say, world rankings are pernicious. All rankings, I would say, are pernicious. That's because I never got into any top 10 ever. I would say that, of course.
Talking about rankings, Prof. Alan Powell sent me a message today on BBC Newsbeat, and it talks about how college students are using sugar daddies to sponsor their education in UK. And, this is a problem that is coming up. But what was the astonishing part? Because they use apps to do this, there's an app where the students also register their college or university name, and there is a ranking of the universities in UK and how many members they have for this app. And well, I'm a Cambridge alumni, and Cambridge is number 4. So Cambridge made the top even in this, yeah. So, Kang, you had a question? Yep.
Yes, Yu Beng from Teaching Learning IMU, Trudie. Trying to end this on a note of levity. So, since you've been involved in so many ethics committees, what in your mind is the most memorable excuse for unprofessional behavior?
Okay, let me just think about this. Okay, I can tell you, obviously I've got to be just slightly careful about this. So a young male student went to the police because he was being sexted, which is sexual texts, apparently. Never happened to me. I'm waiting for it, but it's never happened. I think I would just grade it. I wouldn't complain. At my age, you'd look at things slightly differently, I think, really. But this was from his girlfriend. And he also said that she'd taken money from his bank account. Okay. And blackmailed him by sending him a picture, compromising picture of himself, and threatening to publish this picture if he didn't pay money. And he actually moved sum of £500 from his account to her account, and she was a medical student. And so this was very serious. We saw him as a victim. It was unfortunate he'd had pictures taken of himself in a compromising way, but, you know, that's a modern youth for you, if you like. But this was unacceptable. So we got them in, and he'd been to the police. And the police were involved and had been to see her and taken her phone to examine it and forensically and so forth. And then suddenly, we were about to see them both, suddenly then he dropped all charges. And he said that it was a mistake, that he'd given her the money willingly, it was a loan and she would pay him back, and all this was so forth and so on. And so we said, well, you know, this is, I mean, it's suddenly changed now. Initially we thought he was the innocent party and she was the baddie. And now suddenly, he was the baddie because he'd been wasting police time and doing all these things, and she was innocent, you see. So we didn't know where we were going on with this. And then we got him in, and he said he blamed his mother. Because his mother didn't like this girl. And when he went home, he said she took his phone from him and kept it and wouldn't give it to him, except to show him the pictures which were occurring on it. And so he blamed his mother for all these things. And so he lives at home, and his mother comes to see him, he says, on a weekly basis when he's away at university, to inspect his room and to go through his phone and his phone records. So it was all his mother's fault. So I think that was the thing about his mother. So yeah, if it's not one thing, it is your mother. So what you were saying about your parents, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So I think that was the worst one.
So I think the half an hour is sort of done, and Trudie has actually taken quite a wide variety of questions based from her talk. And Trudie, now I was thinking, we're talking about culture and whether this is, in what context, you know, we started, but when do we cheat? There is a saying in Tamil, but I won't say it in Tamil, that you say 1,000 lies to get a marriage done, something to that context. And in that context, you know, that even today, when people look for partners and everything, and through the dating apps, people probably cheat or, you know, give alternative facts to do that. But the context here that we were talking is actually about health professions and the trust that they have by patients, by the community, by the public, and by their peers to perform. Because it's not just the duty to the community, but amongst their peers. And that's why it's so important for us to support, from at least us as faculty and as an institution, to support the prevention and to ensure that this does not happen or happens less. I don't think it will, you know, there will be new forms of cheating and new forms of things that will be coming up, but at least from institutional policy and setup. And that's why I think that diagram that you showed at the end, to me, it was a big eye-opener, because it was not just about the punishment or thing for the student, but what you could do at the institutional level or at the program or school level to ensure things like this happen less infrequent. So thank you very much. It was an excellent talk. A big hand for Trudie. And thank you very much again.